Like Gen Z men are significantly more conservative than Gen Z women and significantly more conservative than millennial men. And so that political gender gap is going to grow, is growing, has grown. And I think that's got to be showing up here in some way. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the long term.
Welcome back to the City Journal podcast. I'm your host, Charles Fain Lehman, senior editor of City Journal. Joining me on the panel today are Neetu Arnold, Rafael Mangual, and Daniel Di Martino. You know them, you love them, you know them from the Manhattan Institute, and also frequently City Journal. Let's jump right into the news of the day. Neetu actually sent me this piece, so she has to have takes on it. There's a recent analysis from the New York Times which finds that the Democratic Party is hemorrhaging voters long before they even go to the polls, in the words of the subhead. Of the 30 states that track voter registration by political party, Democrats lost ground to Republicans in every single one between the 2020 and 2024 elections, often by a lot. They also have registration disadvantage for the first time in at least 5 years of Pew's data. And so there's a bunch of big red flashing warning signs for the Democrats in terms of registration. A lot of people say registration doesn't matter. And I think there's an interesting question here about, is this about a decline in partisan identification versus a decline in willingness to vote? But it is part of this broader changing electorate that we talk about a lot on the show and that we're very interested in that transformation. So I want to throw it to the panel. What do we make of this headline? What do we make of this development? Is this a warning sign? Is it a sign of something else? What should Democrats, Republicans, and everyone else take away from this?
I mean, I think it's been a warning sign for a long time. I mean, even since the election results in November. I mean, right after the election, everyone was talking about the Hispanic vote shifting to the right. And I looked into the Asian vote shifting to the right. Major cities, even New York, a lot of the Asian voters had shifted by 30 points to the right. And I went and talked to those voters. And I think what I would characterize what they told me, it was like the Democrats were pushing policies that were like it was like toxic compassion, because they want to support affirmative action. They want to support, making it easier to get into some of these high quality schools and competitive schools, but it's often at the expense of people who worked really hard. When it came to crime, they weren't addressing those issues very well, and there were real effects on people. They were changing their behavior and whether they took a subway to work or not. So I think there were some real effects on people, and they were tired of the extremes of their party. And I think many just they were not happy with the Democrats. And so we saw that with the election results. And I think when you're seeing decrease in voter registration, you're seeing people who are sending a message to the party. They're not happy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with, former New York Democrats who have sort of consistently voted with the left their entire lives, who, were just completely mugged by the reality of 2020, particularly on the crime issue. So, obviously that's not a representative sample. But I think the other thing going on here, too, is just the demographic problem that Democrats face. I mean, Gen Z is significantly more conservative than previous generations,
By some
specifically
measures,
millennials.
not by every measure, right? It depends on which cohort you
Sure.
take. It sounds like part of it is COVID exposure. There's some polling says there's a juncture there. Right?
Yeah, but there's also like a big gender dynamic there as well, right? Like Gen Z men are significantly more conservative than Gen Z women and significantly more conservative than millennial men. And so that political gender gap is going to grow, is growing, has grown. And I think that's got to be showing up here in some way. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the long term. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on relationship dynamics, but when you have, that big of a political shift, you have to imagine that at some point the genders are going to come together on issues because they can't hate each other forever.
never know.
out of
I don't
necessity,
know.
right? Either
South
that or the
Korea,
population is going to go down a lot.
The experience of South Korea tells us that a developed democracy can have such a
Yeah.
profound gender misalignment problem. It can get way
Well,
worse.
the joke in Germany is that because the parties, it's a multi-party system, right? And then there's like the far right and the far left party. The joke is that like the fascist guy dates the communist woman in Berlin. But I think it's not just about what happened in the last few years, the decline in Democrat registration. It's also just the polarization of the country, right? I think in the past, there used to be huge swaths of the United States that were registered Democrats and would vote for Republicans. That's what the Reagan Democrats were. That's what the Democrats who voted for Nixon were, the Democrats who voted for Bush. That's not going to happen anymore. And there didn't used to be, by the way, many Republicans who voted for the Democrats. The Republicans were like just the tinier conservative party, and the Democrats were more like the catch-all party that some Republicans appeal to. I think we are now firmly in a system that is of two camps that are opposed to each other, and there's very little overlap.
I do think we shouldn't go too far on this metric because your partisanship is partly about voting intention, but it's also about identification, right? Like there are many independents who you can sort as leaning D or leaning R, and that's pretty predictive of their voting behavior. From the voting behavior perspective, one of the things we've seen is there's been this sort of switch in the dynamics where the GOP used to be the smaller but more likely to vote party because it captured a larger share of the elderly vote, the elderly turnout. Today, the Democrats have the high propensity voters, even as they're becoming the smaller party. And so that sort of checks their size disadvantage because they show up in the midterms, they show up in the all-cycle elections, the way the Republicans don't. But so to me, the signal is almost actually much more about a decline in the willingness to identify yourself as a Democrat, right? Which goes along with the declining popularity of the Democrats, and in some senses with the normalization of Donald Trump, right? Like, there was just as an example, there's a news story earlier this week about, I forget, maybe it's the PGA Tour. I think it's the PGA Tour re-added one of Trump's golf courses to its, its circuit, and that was just kind of like, Trump has won. After 10 years in the discourse, he's stuck around and he won. And so if your brand was built on, as the Democratic Party's brand was built on, being against Trump, you have a serious cultural problem when the culture shifts in the Trump direction. And I think that's been true even as the president's popularity has sort of stagnated over the past 3 to 5 months. That
Can I pose the following question? I mean, what does anyone buy the possibility that part of what we're seeing is just unpopularity of the Democrats on the left, which is becoming more and more extreme? I mean, we see this with the rise of people like Mamdani, who had the highest voter turnout in New York City mayoral primary history. People like AOC, these DSA figures that, would have been fringe 2 years ago, are now kind of becoming mainstream. I mean, is that part of what we're seeing? Is the Democrat Party dying in
Did
part
you
because
see
it's not
the
attracting its left flank?
Did you see the post of party registration by name? And so they had the name Muhammad. And what share of Muhammads in the United States are registered Democrats? It suddenly dropped in the last couple of years. This is not because Muslim voters are becoming Republican. This is because of the entire, Palestine, Gaza thing. And then they're like, we're just not going to register Democrat, but they're really still on the left. And so I think there is the two cases, Rafa. There is the really far left people who say, I'm not a Democrat, but they still vote left. And then there's also the very moderate Democrats that are like, the Democrats have moved too far left on cultural issues, and I can't identify as a Democrat even if I'm not a Republican.
I mean, one thing that was interesting looking at the New York Times map was that you'll see large decreases in Democrat registration in the Northeast, so states like Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And, Massachusetts has a lot of registered independents, even though it's considered a solidly blue state. So I think some of the lower registrations you're seeing in Democrats, they may just be going more independent. But I think to your point, I see this on social media a lot of times, especially among, Gen Z or among millennials. they think the Democrats are not going far enough. And so some of them are just, they're very, they're not happy with the Democrats. And so it's sort of like Democrats are bust. And I think that is something we should be concerned about, because you're going to be seeing a lot more polarizations, and it almost seems like you're going to have something extremely far left, and then we might have to go extremely far right. And I think that creates a lot of instability.
I do think there's an interesting sort of tripartite, three-part framing there, where like there are in the American democratic system, we solve our problems of ideological diversity by putting all the ideologies under two tents, rather than having every ideology represented in a multi-party system for a host of reasons. And I think you could argue that the Democrats have sort of three discrete ideologies under the tent right now. One is the sort of DSA tendency that, contrary to what Ralph is saying, I think it seems likely to sort of dominate in big blue cities, New York, Seattle, Minneapolis, the three we've talked about on the show. I'm not sure it has play outside of that. Like Dan Osborne didn't do that great. So this DSA-ism, there's sort of what I would think about as like I don't know, actual existing Bidenism, which is sort of a combination of like deference to the institutions, deference to authority, deference to sort of prior rule, combined with generic affection for democracy, whatever that may mean. And then the third bucket is like the sort of reformist, like third way Democrats, which are most recently instantiated in the sort of abundance people, but I think are really just part of that Clintonian inheritance.
The Blue Dog coalition in Congress.
Right. Yes. Marie Gluckskamp-Perez, who's a representative from Washington, for our listeners who don't know her, and is sort of trying to stake a position as a moderate on a bunch of these issues. And so, I mean, it's
Laura Gillen's another one.
Who?
Laura Gillen.
Yeah, Jared Golden.
Yeah.
In Maine. The point I'm making is, like, in some senses, if we're talking the Democratic Party getting smaller and becoming more like the late 20th century Republican Party, which was an ideological coalition, the limit to that model, which I forget who said that, but the limit to that analogy is the Republican Party is small because it was dominated by one ideology, and that was American conservatism, as dictated by a handful of tastemakers.
Before Reagan wasn't that
The
way.
Democratic Party is ideologically split at the same time that it's getting smaller. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No, but because before Reagan, it wasn't that way. Before Reagan, there were the liberal Republicans and the conservative Republicans, and it was still a small party. So you could still have an equilibrium like that, I guess.
And even in the
Like, there's
post-Reagan
still-
world, I mean, it was a fusionist party, right? I mean, you still had lots of infighting on the right, on all, in all sorts of spaces between, conservatives, libertarians, religious traditionalists.
I thought liberal Republicans still existed even after Reagan.
Kind
Well-
of, but they
well,
very
but
rapidly became Democrats.
It was the great decline, right? Like the Rockefellers of the world, all of that. After Goldwater won the primary in '64, that was a big shift. And today, I mean, who are the liberal Republicans, right?
Okay, maybe not today,
right.
but like maybe 10 years ago.
Bill Weld. No, I mean there are a handful. I mean, the
Haven't heard that
best
name in a while.
for Liberal Republican is Lisa Murkowski or Suzanne Collins in the Senate, and Susan Collins is actually, or like Phil Scott, the governor of Vermont.
Right. Yeah.
There are John Sununu. But like New England Republicans are a very specific and strange breed. They do exist, but they do not represent the party. My response to that, Daniel, is just that there is a 15 to 20 year period where the conservative movement is taking over the party, is like trying to consume, and they're in a very active struggle with the liberal, the Rockefellers and the John Lindsays and all the rest of them, and they kind of just win decisively in 1980 because Ronald Reagan is, like Donald Trump, a generational figure in American politics, and he just completely sweeps the board, and everybody coming after him has to, for a period of arguably between 1984 and 2016, everyone just sort of has to like agree with the Reagan consensus, which is a really useful way for disciplining a party. My point is, like, if you don't have numbers and you don't have ideological discipline, you have a really big problem. And I think what saved the GOP's small size historically was the ideological discipline, that they were able to pull people over into their coalition because the ideology was persuasive. And that's not true for the Democrats, at least at present. Although I think there's a real threat that it becomes true as the party shrinks, which is my separate concern.
Although to the extent that, what we're seeing in the voter registration share shift is Republicans pulling new voters in, um, that actually I think could possibly undermine the ideological conformity within the party because to the extent that new people are coming in, I'm not sure it's because they've been persuaded by, conservative ideas as much as they've been dissuaded by the, crazy democratic elitism on wild issues. Like, I mean, I have friends that are, union guys, iron workers that have voted Democrat their whole life, but the transgenderism stuff, just threw them for enough of a loop that they're now voting for they're full on MAGA. They don't care about free markets. They don't care, about crime to some extent, but like, the sort of bread and butter, tax and spend issues that, conservatives really define themselves by is not what's motivating their sort of.
And the Republican Party has adapted to that, right? Like, when you think about who is drawn in portions of the coalition, it's the 5% of voters who came in under RFK, who is a Democrat, and a bunch of voters who were attracted by Donald Trump, who is at various points in his life a Democrat and has at no point been a doctrinaire movement conservative and is pretty disdainful of the movement a lot of the time. Like that, the GOP, this is my point at switching places. The GOP is becoming a bigger and less ideologically cohesive tent at the same time that the Democratic Party is becoming smaller and potentially more ideologically cohesive.
Right.
It's not
The question about the Democrats becoming smaller and the whole ideological battle, kind of like what happened in the GOP, is which faction is going to win, right? Like, are they going to become a socialist party? That's my greatest concern.
I mean, I think so. Who was it yesterday that said that anyone opposing Mamdani was opposing the future of the Democratic Party?
Ben something? Was it Ben? I saw it on Twitter.
Was it Ben Rhodes?
Yeah, I think it was Ben Rhodes.
Yeah, it's like
Ben
never
Rhodes,
would have guessed
he was
that.
nicknamed Hamas in the White House.
Yeah,
I mean, what's interesting to see with the divide here, like when you look at the GOP, there are a lot of competing factions, and you see a lot of leaders that we can name off. But when I look at the Democrats, who's their front runner? Like right now, Gavin Newsom is making the news, but sometimes I think, is it too early? Like, is he the front runner for president? And I know we talk about Mamdani or AOC, but that's, to me, that feels more local right now. And so it's sort of like who's leading the Democrats and where are they going?
Yeah, no, I think you're right that like a
one.
socialist is very unlikely to win the next primary. But the question is the direction and how long until they have a serious contender, kind of like what Bernie Sanders was. Because if they do take over, a socialist will eventually become president because this is a country that alternates between parties. And so that is why it should be a great concern for all Americans, regardless of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, to have one socialist party in the country.
Let's take Neetu's answer, Neetu's thought as our exit. I had something else, but I think we went in a different direction. Let me ask, of the current, forming field of potential 2028 Democratic nominees, who do you think is the front runner right now? And the answer is almost certainly that whoever wins is not going to be somebody who's in the field right now, but who's currently the front runner in 2028? Neetu, you floated something like the question, so I'll give it to you first.
I mean, I'm gonna say Gavin Newsom for right now, but if you're saying based on what we know right
Where
now,
we are now.
I think it's a little too early. Like I think he has the chance to fizzle out, but he's the only person that comes to mind.
Gavin. He's whatever the heck he's currently doing. He's doing some weird stuff on Twitter. Ralph, who do you think is the front runner right this instant?
I think it's AOC.
Yeah.
Scary as that might be. I mean, just look at the crowds that her and Bernie were drawing on their little tour. I don't think this is just a localized thing. I think the Democratic Party has really shifted towards socialism in a big way, and it has kind of thrown, like it's thrown expertise out the window in a way, or it's just made the decision that young, dynamic, compelling personalities are the future of its party, and I think AOC checks those boxes.
Do you know, I just checked Polymarket. The front runner I'm betting is Gavin Newsom, but the second is AOC.
Yeah.
And they're pretty far ahead from the others who are like Pete Buttigieg or like Andy Bashir. I think it's certainly one of them. I would say, a primary between like AOC and Gavin Newsom would be very interesting because even though Newsom has a lot of the spotlight, he's really charismatic. AOC doesn't she's not a governor. She doesn't have a record. She doesn't have anything they can blame her for. And Gavin Newsom has a terrible record as a governor that she's going to attack, and probably is going to attack him very effectively as a woman, younger, like so many ways that I do think AOC has a greater chance than Gavin Newsom in 2028.
But I can't imagine her line of attack because, I mean, it's hard to believe that she would have governed particularly differently.
That he's
Then
put
again-
out by the
He's
big
moderate.
corporations
He's
in
moderate.
Silicon
Then again,
Valley.
there's Mombani.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and you know, I think that would be the question is Newsom is trying to pivot. He is trying to signal moderation in these sort of superficial ways. And the question is like, will that help or hurt him? His bet is that it
That would
will.
hurt him, and today's Democratic Party absolutely hurts him.
We'll see what happens in 2 years. You
Yeah,
know,
the
is the read
redistricting
best.
stuff is helping him, I'll say. That this whole thing with Texas and California and redistricting is absolutely putting him on the spotlight in a good way for Democrats, for him.
He fights. All right. I will move on to from national politics to, well, also national politics, but in the district. On Tuesday, President Trump announced his plan to review the Smithsonian museums for alleged negativity towards America. To quote from him on Truth Social, the Smithsonian is, all caps, out of control, where everything is discussed is how horrible our country is, how bad slavery was, and how unaccomplished the downtrodden have been. Nothing about success, nothing about brightness, nothing about the future. So this has obviously provoked something of backlash. Critics are charging Trump with rewriting history. Defenders are saying, no, actually, we're trying to make history balanced. What do we make of this controversy? Is there, you know, is it good for Trump to get involved on this level? Are we concerned about this kind of management from the White House? And then at the same time, are the Smithsonian institutions and museums more broadly too negative? Is it a problem that we're too negative about American history? What do we make of this?
I think, yes, it's a problem that we're too negative about American history. I haven't been to enough of the Smithsonian's and not
Really?
I mean, I've been to a few, but
You gotta get you
not,
down. You gotta
none
get you down
recently.
to DC.
I mean, yeah, I got, honestly, my favorite museum in DC closed a couple years ago. That was the Newseum. I used to love that place. Every time I would go to DC, I would buy the 2-day pass, and I would go both days. They had this old exhibit of old newspapers going back to, like, I don't know, 800 AD or something like that. And, you know, you could see like op-eds written by the founders, which was super, super cool. Anyway, look, I think it's absolutely a problem. And what Trump is doing here is he's sending an important signal, which is, you know, you have one party in this country that has kind of branded itself on criticizing America and everything that it stands for and undermining its history in order to rewrite it for the future. And I think he's just putting a stake in the ground and saying, no, we're going to be proud of our history. And I think that's a good thing. How he goes about doing that with this kind of micromanagement approach and picking the Smithsonian's as a target. I mean, you know, we'll see if it plays out. I suspect if it gets a lot of play, he'll continue to go down that road. But if it doesn't catch on, you know, he'll move on to something else. But it is an important signal for him. But I don't think, you know, outside of maybe the Museum of African American History, you know, that you can make that case all that compellingly. I mean, you know, I've been to the
Well, there's a
Smithsonian Museum of
Latino
American.
museum now, Rafa, and it's pretty bad,
What
actually.
was that?
There's a
What did you
Latino
see?
museum now, and
Is
it's
there now?
bad. It's pretty bad, yeah.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, yeah, I think the sort of ethnic branded museums are always going to be, you know, where you see most of that stuff. But I mean, a couple of years ago was the last time I went to the Smithsonian for American history. It wasn't all that bad. In the Air and Space Museum, I walked out of there ready to go to war with, you know, China. I mean, it was, you know, so that place is awesome.
Yeah, I think that they don't need to make this like a presidential issue. He just needs to use his appointees to change what's going on inside. You don't even need to make headlines about it, but I do think it needs to change because the African American History Museum, the Hispanic or Latino History Museum, those are pretty woke. And it's not because they exist necessarily, though, you know, that's a different debate. But it is certainly because of the persistent focus on oppression and discrimination and blaming of the U.S. government for all of it. When in reality, we need to put it into context of what happened in the world in that same time period, of the opportunities of those same people in other parts of the world, of how this country abolished slavery and went to war to abolish slavery. Like this is the real history of it. and the success, right? Because so many people of those backgrounds found success because there was actually not that much oppression as the left wants to say today.
And still
Right.
find success, right? I mean, the Democrats are currently, fighting tooth and nail to, open the borders and liberalize immigration policy, all based on the reality that people around the world recognize the United States as the land of opportunity, as a place where, to whatever extent they might be oppressed, that is going to be completely overshadowed by the potential benefits associated with living in the United States.
Rafa,
And
it
that-
was so much so that blacks from the Caribbean were immigrating to America while there was still slavery as black free
100%. Yeah.
persons, and they were finding success.
Yeah.
Look, I think the White House is targeting the Smithsonian museums in part because there's just a larger distrust of institutions and, especially going to the universities. I mean, when you look at history fields, they lean overall left. And I think the thing with history is it's not so much of a problem of showing what happened in history, showing both the good and the bad, but it's the interpretation. And that's going to be a problem when your fields are overwhelmingly left. There isn't people challenging each other. And I think that's why we do end up getting biased history. And that's unfortunate for places like the Smithsonian because I think they can be great educational resources for our public.
Yeah, I mean, there is a challenge just in sort of you can't avoid making value judgments in how you curate, right? And one and I think that in some senses there's a sense that Trump is trying to undo the ideology, and my response is like, the ideology set of value judgments, but also Trump has a set of value, right? Daniel has a set of value judgments about, like, I happen to agree with Daniel's value judgments about, like, America as a land of opportunity and prosperity, but it is a set of value judgments, and you could make a different one. And so it is just like, this gets into this deeper issue of, like, is Trump depoliticizing or is he politicizing in a different direction? And what,
There will always be politicization, and I think the Smithsonian should promote the idea that America is a good country. And we need to be unapologetic about it. America is a good country. America is a great country. That's why people come here. That's why people visit the Smithsonian. Yes, there was slavery in the United States. So
There's
was
also
there
slavery in
slavery
every other
entire
society in the world.
still today. So we need to be unapologetic about saying that America is great. And I do like that Trump is doing that focus.
Yeah, look, I
It
think
could
that
be more effective if the process, like how he did it. Like I think Ralph brought up earlier, the White House micromanaging, maybe not the best way to go about it.
Yeah, no, but I think he sees this as a sort of continuation of the fight that he just won against NPR, right? The question that he's trying to answer is, should American taxpayers, who are a majority of whom are deeply patriotic and voted for him, should they be forced to subsidize the making of a case against their own country? Right. And I think that's an easy question to answer, right? I mean, ultimately, to the extent that he has the powers to pull these levers, he should pull these levers and, let the next president, if it's AOC, pull him in the opposite direction and, fully embrace that brand. But I think it's actually a useful fight to have for that reason, right? Because it forces the dichotomy. It forces the other side to come out and say, no, actually, we do think America is bad. And, I think what Trump is betting on is that that's not a message that's going to resonate with a huge portion of the population. And I think he's right.
Then imagine when they try to change it back in the future to saying those things, it's going to
Yeah.
be so bad. So maybe if they don't like it, we can also get rid of taxpayer funded institutions. I also am not totally opposed to reducing government spending.
But I think this gets to the point I made earlier about sort of the normalization of Trump, which is last time, if he had tried this, I think there would have been a much more aggressive response, and the undoing by the Biden administration was simply been framed as Trump, tried to undermine the integrity of these institutions, and we're just returning to what the commonly accepted history is. And I just don't think the public would buy that anymore, which is a marked shift in how they engage with this conversation, the conversation of Trump.
I think that's exactly right.
All right. I wanna keep us moving, but I will ask everybody. I don't know if we'll see what Ralph's answer is, but you've been to some Smithsonian. My question is, what is your favorite of the Smithsonian Institution museums that you have been to? If you can't name one, you can name another one in DC. It's okay, but I really prefer Smithsonian.
It's easily Air and Space.
Yeah, okay. Ralph goes to Air and
Really?
Space.
No,
Daniel?
for me, it's natural history.
Oh, it's a good one.
That is
Yeah,
a good one.
I love natural history. Yeah, I have a second best, but I want to let you.
Sorry, air and space here.
Really?
Yeah,
You guys should go to the National
I've been.
Gallery as well. The National Portrait
The
Gallery is
National
part of the
Portrait Gallery is
Smithsonian
great.
That was
network,
great.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
been to the National Portrait Gallery, American History, Natural History, Air and Space. I think one or two others, but Air and Space by far the best. The flight simulator, so much
I
fun.
remember I went there my first year that I interned in DC, and it was very cool.
I'm going to assert moderator's prerogative to say three things. One is that I can't pick natural history because the Natural History Museum in Pittsburgh, where I'm from, is better because we had all the robber barons stealing the dinosaurs way back when. But we have a good collection of stolen dinosaurs. Thing two is I will also go to the Air and Space Museum, but I will be different and select the Udvar-Hazy Center, which is the Air and Space Museum annex out in Virginia, which if you
Okay.
haven't been to, you should absolutely go to. They have an SR-71 Blackbird and also a space
Yeah.
shuttle. And every time we go there, my kid tries to bother me into getting him a plane from the gift shop, and I usually give in because planes are cool. And three is that I will give an honorable mention to the Museum of the American Indian, which itself is like but the cafe is extremely good. So if you're looking where to eat at the
That's
Smithsonian,
rare in government
Yeah.
museums.
No, actually, a number of the like the African American History Museum, actually, the cafe is also decent. Like they go out of their way. I mean, they go out of their way to like do ethnic cuisine, but it's not like messing around. Like it is. It's actually good.
And the
So
Natural History Museum cafe here in New York is actually pretty good.
Which one?
The Natural History Museum.
But yeah, the
in
one
New
in
York.
New York City is really
Yeah.
All
Both
right.
sides.
Yeah.
So before we go, we were talking something else, but I feel like our light item is I gotta come up with a question for this one. But just before we all got on, we were talking about this strange story that broke. A reporter from The City, which is a New York-based magazine, alleges with substantial supporting details that an Eric Adams campaign affiliate tried to give her a potato chip bag with an unknown but non-trivial amount of money in it, and then she tried.
Is it non-trivial? Was it like $180 or something
If
like
you want
that?
to give me $180, I will take it from you.
That's
So,
a bad bribe.
I don't just want to ask what's going on here, but very succinctly, what do we make of this situation? Without necessarily passing judgment on the merits of the candidate, what do we make of what's gone on in this latest breaking news? I'll get everyone's short responses. Ralph, go ahead.
I cannot think that this came anywhere close to the candidate. This is just it all. I mean, $180 in a potato chip bag, unsolicited, to a reporter for The City, which is like, if you don't know what The City is, I mean, these are in what I would guess would be some of the least bribable reporters, in New York City journalism circles. So yeah, the whole thing just strikes me as completely strange, but I don't think it has anything to do with Adams. My guess is this person, who apparently has a bit of a criminal history here, is just off her rocker, kind of crazy. Because yeah, again, I just can't think that $180 in a potato chip bag would have gotten you anything. I mean,
Also,
She
why
did.
180? Like, sorry, this is
Oh,
just
the
me.
cash
Like,
bag. I don't even know if
it's
Like,
180.
why not 200 or 150?
It was 100 and some 20s.
Several 20s. Yeah, it was $100 bill
Well,
and
the
several
cash that
20s.
person
So
had on the wallet, and that's it.
We should note that she asserted that it was a cultural affectation, which then
I
the
never heard of it.
Chinese and a number of other Chinese New Yorkers have sounded off to go, no, it's not. So
I mean, I would have believed that if she was Latin American, because it's so common to bribe in Latin America. But it is a bribe. It is not a cultural affectation. People do
Right.
bribe a lot in developing.
Yeah, but in Latin America, $180 will get you pretty far. I mean, in New York City, that's that's dinner.
I
Go
agree.
to Philippines. I've seen the videos of like the cops in the Philippines being bribed for.
Well, the Dominican Republic is even worse. It's bad.
So no, I think this is just a crazy person, and this. I mean, obviously, actually, it's great for the journalist, because now the journalist has a great story to break of something that happened. But this has nothing to do with the actual candidate, and it's a shame.
Does this happen a lot in journalism or in politics, or is this just a one-off
No one's ever
incident?
offered me any money, but
Well,
if you want my
doesn't happen in
Venmo,
that
I'll
way.
I'll
Bribery
shoot it
doesn't
out.
happen in that way, but PR agencies,
Right.
as we've seen with influencers on the left and the right, it's insane the number of influencers that people trust because of what they supposedly believe, and they're all being paid tens of thousands of dollars to
Hundreds.
promote on hundreds of thousands, depending on who, for specific issues. I don't know if you saw the recent article on Laura Loomer herself,
Yeah.
that now the White House is concerned about her because she's getting paid to promote all the things she does. And I had warned about this, months ago, because it's obvious that these influencers are getting paid to promote these issues.
That note, I think that's about all the time that we have for potato chip bags and everything else. Listeners, thank you as always to our panelists. Thank you to our special producer, Sophia Izzo, who's sitting in for Isabella. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, even if you haven't, don't forget to like, subscribe, YouTube, other platforms, anywhere else you can hear our show. Comments and questions, always welcome down below. Maybe at some point we'll even answer some of them. Mostly we get comments. We don't really get a lot of questions. I'd love to answer some questions.
Yes.
Until next time, you've been listening to the City Door Podcast. You'll join us again soon.